Okay, thanks for another week, everyone joining with the updates. Not much news other than this one paper that came out a few weeks ago with some of the people here. Nydia was the first author, so maybe we'll have Nydia give a presentation on the paper, track the evolution of the virus in Malta sometime when she has time.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. I'll hit you up offline.
All right.
And I mentioned this the past few weeks. We're trying to organize a meeting, or I'm trying to organize a meeting with a few people, not just on COVID, but on regulatory armies and how they might be impacted from everything from infectious diseases to space. So tentatively, it'll be at University of Malta, but we're looking for sponsors. So if you know of any, let me know. There's some sponsors potentially coming up. So you can put this on your schedule as a meeting that most likely will happen next around this time. So if you wanted to go, we'll have registration, all that opened up once we have some sponsors. But if you wanted to provide any sponsors, I have a slide deck that you could pass to people. All right, so let's go to the COVID news. People haven't already. I keep this up here. You can order your free COVID test, which they made available again. But I'll just leave this up here. So if you haven't done it, maybe you might want to go ahead to this website and order your free COVID tests. There's this article down here that just came out yesterday that was talking about potential increased stroke risks if you get the flu and the COVID shot. Some of the media headlines are just talking about kind of misconstrued what they're talking about COVID, but I just wanted to spend a couple of seconds talking about this. It's referring to this paper here, this preprint. First of all, you have to take things a little bit with a grain of salt because it's a preprint, so it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. And then some quotes from this news article from different scientists from around the U.S. But basically, what they're saying is, in this paper is that there's a potential chance of a stroke for people who are older if you get these two vaccines together. There's no science, there's no biology in it. It's very correlative, like epidemiological study they did. And again, it has to be vetted. And as these people say, shouldn't be alarmed. There's shots at the same time is quite effective if you do it. And then that has to be, and the risk they say in there is very minuscule. But if you wanted to if you have an older member of your family there, then you want them to get the vaccines separately. That's no harm either. But just to bring it up, because I know some of the headlines are like, you get stroke with the COVID vaccine, but that's not the case. It's the combination potentially, and it's a very small chance, and there has to be more studies done before people can actually have a definitive conclusion on this. But on some vaccine news here, there's this big study that was done. This paper came out this past week on the bivalent boosters, talking about the range of outcome for large health system and then tested negative case controls. And overall, in here, they even showed potential long COVID benefits of getting the booster if you haven't already, and the benefits of, how it reduces the severity, reduces the illnesses, reduces, overall benefits of it, which I think preaching to the choir here, but good to know more. So Eric Toppel's blog here that I once I look at, he had a nice new post here talking about how the virus is doing this evolutionary arc, as he calls it, and basically the rapid changes happening in the virus. So there's a few papers that came out this past week tracking the evolution of SARS-CoV-2, and then some, like for example, this top paper in Cell looked at the variants, and then also had this machine learning tool in there that was looking at how it might eventually evolve. So they were looking at, I guess when the paper was initially was XBB and the evolutionary track, and then it's basically the gist of all this was talking about, this virus, not as we know, is not like other viruses, and accumulated mutations is a lot. That is here 2.5 fold more rapid, as Eric says, than influenza. and then also is 7 times more folder, faster than other coronavirus for rapid antigen evolution, which some of these papers highlight. For example, this paper from Trevor Bedford was highlighting the evolution of this virus, SARS-CoV-2, and how rapidly it evolves from the evolution of the rapid, from the antigens, and then how it might be immune escaping later on. This paper I talked about last week also. And then to further, like there's some figures from these papers, they show, for example, this figure here, looking at SARS-CoV-2 and in the overall, which is referred to this text here, the rapid evolution of this virus compared to the other viruses, and you can see how definitive this is. And the one thing that he was discussing in this blog post is talking about the variants that are now current and what potentially can happen in the future. So right now in the US, this HV.1, which I'll go into and show you the data in a second, is becoming the more dominant strain, which evolved from this EG5.1. But all of them come from this XBB. So your booster was here, and overall, it seems like if you did get your booster, you should still be fairly reasonably protected for these new variants popping up from this tree. Now, there's this BA2.86 we've talked about in the past that still hasn't really taken over. But what we've been seeing, and this one had like the 40 plus mutations that on there that was concerning. But what's evolving from this virus is this JN.3123. And this is what they're seeing now, as Eric talks in his blog here. This is being shown in this paper starts talking about the antigenicity of this version variant, and the subsequent variants will be following the same thing. But they're talking about how here this JN is starting to show up in France and other countries in Europe. You're saying UK, US, well, US a little bit, but Iceland, Portugal, and so on. So the concern is now if this does actually become the dominant strain in Europe and eventually the US, what does that mean about the immune response to the prior booster? Because the boosters are really here, not as much here. And this evolutionary path, as he says, like switches to here, what happens? And you can see here, for example, the antigen map that he has from some of these other papers. The JN variant from the BA2.86 is quite different from the rest of these for the antigen immune response or escape, I should say. So that's a nice little post he has talking about the these papers here, how they've mapped the virus and how it's changing, and then what is occurring now, the dominant strains, and what could happen. And I guess as he put in the very end is, if you haven't got your booster, you should get your booster, because regardless of what happens here, you're still going to be fairly well protected for the current variant that's leading these other ones that are popping around the US. And this one still, you're going to get a better protection, obviously, with the booster if you didn't get it. There's this other preprint here. I'm going to take this as a preprint, so take a grain of salt, but this is an interesting preprint that came out yesterday, talking about sort of almost long COVID related, but say COVID and long COVID related. But talking about, they basically looked at the plasma and the different levels of the SARS-CoV-2 spike or different regions like spike antigen and antigen, this one antigen, and so on in the overall antigen. And this paper was showing that in the plasma, 2 years or a year plus, I should say, there's high levels of this antigen still floating around in the plasma, which is interesting. Again, preprint, so we'll see what happens when the actual paper comes out. But this would actually be maybe indication after you have had the virus, people are now realizing it might be a lot longer. These antigens are floating around in your blood, and this could have implications for potential immunogenic response and so on, based on like the number of people that have been infected, the sheer number as they put in their conclusions. But there's a couple of it seems like an interesting study to look at and preprint again. So, but this could have maybe some implication for your immunity also, or long-lasting immunity. So some long COVID paper in the news. So there's this one paper that I shared with some of you people. Some of you earlier this morning I saw it because it seems like it's a pretty interesting paper where they did a multi-omics meaning proteomics and metabolomics study, and they looked at biomarkers. Well, their whole goal is looking at biomarkers from the blood. I think it's plasma they looked at. I forget if it was plasma or serum, but it's blood they put. But which one it was, I forget. But this is the breakdown from the graphical abstract. That was 117 acute COVID patients and 28 healthy controls. They had repeated blood collections, in 6 months, and then they categorized the recovered, mild, or severe after recovery, and then 18 months after discharge, and then they followed them up, and then cases of mortality. So then they looked at some cytokines, meaning some inflammatory markers, and then they did the lowest protein. So actually, when I emailed other folks like Steve and the other people, I said we should probably mine the omics data and actually have processed proteomics and metabolomics data in their supplements. So people like me and others wanted to play with their data. That's probably something we can look at. But the take-home message of this paper, after looking at this is kind of a summary article about this, talking about it, is that and then they had also a machine learning predictive model to know the accuracy of how these molecules might change over time. But the take-home message was the main biomarker out of it was plasma. They looked at, sorry, I forget if it was plasma or serum, but they looked at the plasma. But the main biomarker they take home is that amino acid taurine was at low levels, with people who had a lot more symptoms or severity. And if you don't know what taurine is, taurine is an amino acid found in these different meat and fish that's produced and also produced by your liver, and it regulates a lot of things with your immune function. But as the senior author said in this interview, is like, people shouldn't run out and consume high levels of it. They should, because some supplements consumed high levels can be damaging too. But there still needs to be a lot more clinical trials and effectiveness to see how well this might increasing your levels of taurine might impact long COVID. But it's a promising study they did where they included omics in this and tried to figure out what is potentially one of the drivers. So they didn't talk about mitochondrial impact, but they did talk about in the conclusion, the discussion, they talked about how the mitochondria is related, but they didn't actually show those results. So it's something I imagine people hear the mitochondrial impact might be related.
Action. Question.
Yeah.
Does the multiomic profiling of plasma reflect the condition of the interstitial fluid that surrounds the cells as well, or are they different?
Well, plasma, you got exosomes, you got free floating particles, so that's what lipids, that's what they would have. Or it depends what they got from the plasma.
So they'd be the same in both interstitial fluid and the plasma.
I'm sure there's factors similar, but I'm sure not everything's conserved between the two, but there should be some similarities, similar factors equivalent in both.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
So there's this other preprint that came out. It's a preprint. This is actually a paper, but this is a preprint. Came out earlier this week. They're looking at neuroinflammation. They did large kind of, well, not large, somewhat large. They looked at 12 past or long COVID patients and 43 normal. So their N could be larger, but they basically did PET imaging and was looking at neuroinflammation related with long COVID patients or past patients. And then they're trying to relate to vascular disease outcomes. So this is a figure from the paper, and basically this is the abstract. So basically what they saw is that definitely in these 12 patients, I guess, compared to your healthy normal patients, they saw from their PET imaging that for long COVID patients that there was there's neuroinflammation somewhat in these regions that they're showing here. And they could suggest that, and they kind of correlated to the vasculature health based on questionnaires and other things they looked at from the PET imaging. So again, a preprint with some other maybe insights on what's happening related to long COVID. They didn't look at anything else other than PET, but then some others. They looked at some other blood test circulating markers, and I think fibrogen was one, and there was like 5 other markers they got from the blood stent, and then they looked at the levels and then they correlate it to this. That's why they're saying circulating markers of vascular dysfunction and how that's correlated with the neuroinflammation. But yeah, it's a preprint, so take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, they're showing, as you see here, from the signals from the PET imaging based on this plot here, and what they've shown. In most regions of the brain, you see a lot more inflammation happening. And I forget how long after they had COVID they imaged here, but you have to read the preprint to remember that. But and there's this last paper that I saw talking about, as actually it was a very large scale study talking about severity, population from Iceland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. It's a 2-year prevalence study looking at physical symptoms with long COVID patients long after. And they looked at 64,000 participants, a lot of people from these Nordic countries. And they said about 22,000 were diagnosed with COVID-19 up to 2 years, maybe long COVID. So that's quite a bit of a third of the population. And in their data had this prevalence of long COVID. And they found, they categorize it for these different conditions: shortness of breath, chest pain, and they basically categorize it from bedridden, no bedridden, to bedridden for 7+ days. So that people who are very, very, very bad off from their long COVID, or acute illness, they called it, and had long COVID. And I guess the implications from this study are saying that they're basically that there's these long-term health effects. Again, another study to bring the fact up that you could have long-term risk with COVID, and how long does it last? So some interesting things that I didn't realize is that there's still, I knew people were bedridden 2 years later, but they kind of quantified this and showed the prevalence of this, that people still bedridden 7 days after the fact. They have the details in the tables of numbers of people in the study and so on. And then what was interesting, they split it up between the different conditions that they saw in the patients, from trouble sleeping to everything you see here. So there's been, depending on the condition here, as you see, there's this still, quite a bit of people within this cohort experience, prevalence of it, I should say, experiencing a lot of these things 2 years plus, as you see here in this last time point. Of course, there's some decline, let's say for chest pain, some of these decline, dizziness, it declines, but then some of them stay the same. For example, trouble sleeping, tiredness, things that we hear are common within long COVID patients, back pain, and so on. So it's an interesting paper looking over at the overall effects 2 years plus. Those are the papers and news I could find. I'm sure there's plenty more out there. But again, this is looking at the prevalence, as I said, HV.1, looking at Raj's panel here, is being prevalent. Of course, it's like a variant soup, right? There's a bunch of different variants out there, but HV.1 is seemingly taking over the EG.51 that was previously dominant. I guess the good news right now, before the holidays are approaching, the wastewater showing the decline. Again, BioBot, as you can see, it's usually 2 weeks prior every time we see the update. And then, so this was from, as they say, this is from the week of October 9th, so 2 weeks ago. So we assume hopefully the prediction is still going down, but we'll find out in another week or two, every week. That's how this is going. And this is kind of the blown up version of snapshot of the different regions. You see most regions are going down. The variants are here. EG.5 is there, but they don't have the separation for HV.1, which would be from this evolution. But depending on what county you're in, like one I live in, there's a little plateau and it's not going down like the national averages. So so it's different depending on the region. Might have not an exploding uptick, but it hasn't actually gone down, let's say, around the Boston area. And as I said, again, the variants, and then I think in the rest of the world's about the same. You can see the HV.1 in the past month has been starting to take over. EG.5, which was taken over, just remains stable. So it looks like this is the, as we said, HV.1 is evolving from the EG.5, as you see here from this tree. So this is the one that's due to its mutations and evolution advantage, it's starting to spread more, and this and it's independent of the region. So and I said JN.1, I said is the one to be concerned of. We don't see it here because it's very minimal. In the US, it's not really around, but in Europe and France and other places, we're starting to see that pop up more and more. And again, I'm going to show these case, obviously looking at case numbers is not very reliable anymore. But hospital admissions, as you might expect, like the wastewater, it's going down for the countries and regions reporting it, same with ICUs. So that's it for today.